Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jen Kentner. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. We're going to go ahead and get started with this morning's webinar. Just as a reminder, you are registered for the Ohio School Design Manual Comprehensive Update hosted by our planning team. Before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items with everyone and introduce our presenters as well. First and foremost, I do want to let you know that this training is being recorded and will be posted on our website for you to review. If you are uncomfortable being recorded, this is your opportunity to leave. The webinar will be made available afterwards. We do ask that attendees keep cameras and microphones off, and additionally, please utilize the chat for any questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to send any sort of chat questions throughout if it is clarifying or time sensitive, and we will be sure to make sure the presenters are aware. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters. So today you'll be hearing from Melanie Durup, the OFCC Chief of Planning, Dean Klaus, the Ohio School Design Manual Project Manager, and Bill Prenisel, OFCC Senior Planning Manager. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dean, who will get started on our presentation.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've been very busy and are eager to share what we've been working on with you through the course of this presentation. As Jen said, I'm Dean, one of the planning managers and shepherding this project through its paces to a fantastic conclusion is our goal. OFCC, many of you are likely aware that we're focusing on K-12 this morning. OFCC is involved in many other construction projects with the state of Ohio, including what we call our agency programs for prisons and healthcare, mental health care, and even the adjutant general. So this is a very focused targeted discussion on the Ohio School, excuse me, Design Manual. We do work across the state, all counties and all districts, 609 at present count, offering our services and of planning and through project management and through the monitoring of construction and so forth. What we know is that all children, all the students deserve a safe, warm, and dry environment to go to school. And what we're seeing, particularly recently with some of our high performance learning experiences, HPLE, the addition, the cherry on top is the stimulation and encourage collaboration and nourish creativity, working in a group environment. You'll see some of that today as well. And if we have a single cornerstone, which I'm sure we have more than one, it would certainly be to be equitable across the state of Ohio in funding and caring for schools to make sure that each district has its turn and a fair stake in going forward. So thank you all and welcome. Melanie?
Thank you, Dean. Next slide. History of Ohio School Design Manual. We originally started this guideline in 1997, and at that time, there was a discussion, well, should we have plans that a district could select, you know, an elementary, a middle, a high school, maybe a few options, or should we have guidelines that would ensure equity and high quality learning environments, kind of like a kit of parts. We wanted to reduce design time, and we wanted to strike the proper balance between statewide standards and local flexibility. And I don't know about you, but I sure am glad that we didn't end up with just standard plans. the design manual provides for such flexibility. So I'm happy we landed here. As I mentioned, the design manual was written in 1997. We had a lot of talented consultants back then, and many of you probably remember Franklin Brown. This was something that he really enjoyed working on throughout his career. It's been updated the last 25 years with the exception of 1998. But over time, we feel like the manual was becoming a little like Humpty Dumpty, a little disjointed parts and pieces. It was updated, but we were just updating section and not holistically updating it. We currently have 425 LEED certified schools. I'm sure many of you remember 2007 when that commission resolution was passed requiring that. And, you know, we have always evolved with the times. Next slide, please. So the process for the update. Before COVID, we were actually meeting with staff to determine what they thought was working well, what maybe needed a little attention. And then in April of 2022, we actually had several listening sessions. We asked our stakeholders to attend sessions, our school districts, architects, interior designers, construction professionals, IT specialists, and engineers. We wanted to find out from our stakeholders what was working, what was not working. We also reached out to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce and the career tech community. In February of 23, we hired TDA to work with us in updating the manual. Next slide. We heard from the stakeholders that the manual should be streamlined and simplified. Information should be condensed. We should allow for easier navigation, provide tools that empower our districts, review daylighting and individual restrooms. We wanted a format that would allow us to update the manual in future years. And we really believe that what we're going to share with you today is responsive to the feedback we received. Dean?
So the the way it shakes out is we started with 10 chapters in this in OSDM, and coincidentally, not necessarily intentionally, we ended with 10 chapters. What happened along the path is chapters, for instance, 4, 5, and 6 were all for our space plates or instructions for what needs to be included in individual types of rooms, classrooms and cafeterias and so forth. And there were quite a lot of those. As Melanie said, the goal was to reduce. So that became one chapter. And then we've added a chapter as well. Safety and security, a very front and center topic these days. And you'll see some of the details on that. So thank you. So where we're at in the process, as Melanie mentioned, back in 2022, the second quarter, we started our listening sessions, and that gathered a lot of information. A lot of people had questions and raised concerns and so forth, and we listened and documented everything. Then with the addition of TDA as a consultant, we were able to organize that content. And the next step, of course, will be the design. The exciting news about the design is that we're going to a web-based interface. And that's going to start right away with the goal of getting commission approval in January. So a lot of work to do, but if you can imagine what that might look like, if you go to the next slide, please. Again, TDA, then Design, our consultant, gave us a few insights as to what that digital interface might look like. The first page is titled, as you can see there, landing page. It gives you access to the chapters directly. The middle image, subsection hub. We're talking here about space plates. The word bracketing used to be used a lot for our program of requirements. That's now programming, and the programming is linked to the new space plates, so everything kind of forms a nice circle of information. And from here, space plates, you would, in theory, would be able to click and go to see the space plate for these relevant type of areas. And the third one, the resource page, our previous space plates were a little less exciting in that they afforded a floor plan and instructions, verbal instructions of what should be included, finishes, materials, so forth, so that designers working with their districts would have a clear path forward. As you can see here, we've added an axonometric of what that type of classroom, this one happens to be a kindergarten classroom, what it could look like or may look like. Again, we're leaving ultimate flexibility for design and arrangements, but in early conversations with districts, it's very important to be able to relate and have the communication tools at hand that everyone understands what's going on, what we're talking about. So in this case, the axonometric is one of the visuals that we've added to that.
And Dean, this is Bill. I think the other thing that is a major goal that we learned having the current manual in place for as long as it has been is the original manual, as Melanie pointed out, really was to get us going and be able to provide information, especially to our designers out there, to create this equity, as well as produce, minimum standards and so on. But that, if you think about it, our current manual really is more geared towards the designers, and our concern over the years has been that it doesn't do as good of a job communicating to non-professionals, that is, end users, administrators, board members. And so what you're seeing here on the screen is, you can see that the whole idea here is not only to make it a good resource for designers, but make it easy to understand for those folks who are not designers, and be able to communicate then well with the folks that are designing their buildings. So that is a major theme that runs through the purpose of what we've done. Thank you.
So that brings us back to our organization going forward for the rest of the presentation, and we'll step through the chapters briefly, pointing out highlights of what's new, different, and possibly rearranged. So, Melanie?
Thank you, Dean. Our next slide will be speaking about Chapter 1, the introduction. Many of you are familiar with the map that talks about the regions within the state of Ohio. That allows for the regional cost factor when we're determining the costs of new. So one of the components in Chapter 1 is the discussion of costs, the project delivery method comparison. How does the superintendent and district go about planning their project, and who should be at the table? Of course, we have to have definitions and abbreviations. And as many of you know, Volume 1 is a huge expansion of Chapter 1, totaling about 100 pages. that explains the planning process as well as what they should expect to see in the design manual by chapter. And we're hoping to roll that volume out in the future. Next slide. Programming. The program of requirements, we used to have 11. We would have K-8, 6-12, K-12, one for elementary, middle, and high school, and 11 different combinations, but we have landed on going to just 3. It eases the ability to keep those up to date. It allows for our architects and districts to become more familiar with the K-12, K-12 with career tech and career tech. So I think you're going to find using these a lot easier, and it's going to align very nicely with the new space plates, which we're going to talk about in detail in a few minutes. We have added the extended learning area into the program of requirement, so I think you'll find it very helpful.
And Melanie, this is Bill. One other thing on that is that in the current version that we have, student-centered learning environments, or HPLE, high performance, was sort of something that developed after the original manual. And of course, we now know that that has really gained a lot of inertia. We see a lot of schools wanting to design their buildings with that in mind. And so now student-centered learning environments is really sort of knit into everything rather than a separate thing. It has become, has sort of rose to the top. And so that is all taken into account as we've looked at these PORs as well as the spaces. And as I said, it's just sort of worked into the entire manual now as something that we would expect to see. So I wanted to make that point.
And Bill, I think you were going to talk to us a little bit of this about the school site.
Right. So on the school site, so this is an example of a chapter that really the content itself didn't really change much. It really has been, just really reorganized. The graphics have been improved. There's better examples of things. But in terms of the actual content that's gone into this, it's pretty much the same as it has been. For example, on site selection, we've added some additional information in there to help clarify things, as well as under the site design things. And we've done some consolidating so that we're not repeating the same information for each type of school. Things that are similar or the same are mentioned only once. So I think when you see this, you'll see that it's a lot of similar information, just easier to navigate. Next slide. Dean had mentioned when he went through the chapters that safety and security now has its own chapter. And I think rightfully so, because of what we know life is like now these days in terms of our society, as well as the governor wanting to raise this level up to make it more important in addressing our schools. So this thing in our previous or our current manual is sort of scattered throughout. And you can find various components of safety and security, but what we've done now is we pulled that all together into one place, and we're now providing more guidance as opposed to just providing options for districts that they can find. It's now in here more where we are helping them to be able to make decisions. We've added checklists in here And go to the next slide, please. I think it has information on some of the governing things, so CEPTED and PASS. And so we've addressed those, and we've then taken that information and created these lists. And they're sort of layered lists so that you can get various degrees of security depending on your specific needs as a school district, as well as what the budget might allow you to do. And it's then also tightly coordinated with the specification section, which points out the various components that would go into this. And I think we have one more slide, Jen. This is an example of, yeah, here's an example of the checklists that we have. And then I think you can go to the next slide, which is showing some of the way it's organized in graphics. You know, we're showing, for example, signage and how that fits into, you know, the overall organization of a school, and being able to help people be able to find their way, not only in the building, but also around the site, which ultimately makes a safer site. So we think this reorganized information and then all put in one place is really going to help school districts and designers. Next slide, Melanie.
Bill? Well, we're really excited about the consolidation of the K-12 space plates. We used to have the elementary classroom, the middle school classroom, and the high school classroom. They were very similar in nature. You know, we had the kind of wet area with the elementary students with the sink and bubbler. And so what we've done is we now have a classroom plate, and it just points out the differences between the 3 grade groupings. We believe it's going to be much nicer for you to work with these space plates and much easier for our school districts. Of course, we've aligned them with the new program of requirements. And so the other benefit is Dean mentioned these axonometrics. And so for our school district, this should be very helpful. And also for our architects when they're trying to convey the information, this will be very helpful in conveying what might be in the classroom. In addition to that, Bill mentioned about the student-centered learning or high-performance learning environments, and you can see the overall adjacency, like the second plan shows the media center and the cafeteria dispersed. And so Winton Woods is really a good example that you might see, you know, if you have the opportunity, that has dispersed dining and the media center. So these are just nice updated adjacency diagrams.
And these aren't required. These are just some ideas. If you remember our old ones, they were, you know, sort of more of the old thinking. And this again is just helping not only designers, you know, come up with some ideas, but also districts as they're thinking about some of these, especially some of these spaces, as Melanie mentioned, that might want to be decentralized. And so what we're just doing is suggesting some ideas. They're not intended to be, you know, this is the way you have to do it kind of thing, but it just helps sort of help the districts see what the possibilities may be. And quite frankly, Melanie, you know, as you mentioned, Winton Woods, there are a lot of examples of districts that work with their designers and created these kinds of spaces with the old manual. So it's not that it couldn't be done. It's just now that we've recognized that there is enough interest. So now, instead of them having to sort of try to figure out, well, can we do this or can we not? what we're telling them up front is, yes, you can do these kinds of things, and we're helping them begin to visualize how that might all go together.
And Bill, they also have the opportunity, if they're not ready to move in this direction, to remain a kind of a traditional school.
Correct.
But we
Right. That's
certainly
an
are
excellent point.
encouraging them to move from
Right.
that.
This is not saying that you have to do it this way. This is just saying, hey, you can do it this way if you'd like. But you're right, Melanie. You know, there are districts out there that still prefer a more sort of traditional kind of layout, which that's fine.
Career Tech, we had 2 great opportunities to meet with a number of the superintendents, and they provided great feedback. We understand that we originally in the design manual in 2001, when we created the Career Tech guidelines, we had our high bay programs at a ratio of 30-1, 15 in the morning, 15 in the afternoon. Now, our Career Tech superintendent said, well, that's not really how we're teaching. To make a program viable, we really need to have 25 in the morning and 25 in the afternoon. So we heard that. We have modified the size of our high bay labs to align with that. And we also have modified the program of requirements to capture that. It is a major change. You know, we need to fit 10 more students in those labs. So we've adjusted that, and we will be going back to the Career Tech community to make sure that we've got this right. We also have new visualizations of the space. Prior to this update, had simply had descriptions of the space. So we believe it's really going to help those that are designing a new or a renovated career center. So they are receiving the same visualization, the axonometrics and the space plate. And we're going to be showing the laboratory equipment as well. And then we also updated the spatial relationships. We had also moved, because of how they're teaching different programs, some of the programs move from one type to another type. And if you're familiar with the guidelines, a lab type 1 or program type 1 is simply a lab. And the further you go up in the numbering systems, the more support spaces that are there. You can see this program type 4 has several spaces supporting the lab.
Thanks, Mel. So chapter 7 is sustainability. And this chapter has been around a long time. In fact, Melanie, I think, mentioned that, you know, in 2006 is when we implemented LEED.
2007.
2007. Okay, thanks. So it's been around a long time. And you know, one thing we know for sure is we've learned a lot of lessons. The current chapter the current version has done a good job. But what we have found is we need to shift the emphasis a little bit on things that we know are working, things that are working well, and things that maybe aren't as attainable as they used to be. So one of the big things that came out of this was that the current chapter has a lot of information on there on daylighting. And when I say daylighting, I'm talking about it in the term, a way LEED looks at it, which is a very specific requirement in terms of meeting this particular standard. And what we have found is that it's not always achievable, especially in the current market that we have. Whenever there's a challenge with trying to meet budgets, we find daylighting as a difficult one to achieve. However, we also recognize the importance of daylighting in terms of its general usage on how it helps kids learn. We know that from research. We know that it just makes the building look better, feel better. So what we've done is essentially we've shifted from a formal daylighting, that is to meet the LEED requirements for daylighting, into more daylighting in terms of the quality of the light in the spaces. That is probably the most significant thing that we've done. And of course, we've also reorganized it, make it a little easier. We've got better graphics. And go to the next slide. I think it will show best is we did extensive studies. Well, I guess we're going to talk about that later. So really, in terms of sustainability, I think the biggest thing would be the change in the quality of lighting, and we'll talk more about where we landed exactly with that. Chapter 8 has been the chapter that has always sort of been the forerunner to the specifications, which talks really about major systems and major materials and infrastructure and how it all fits together. This chapter, in terms of its essence, is the same as it has been, but it has major updates in terms of new items that we've added. And I think probably the biggest thing that we've done is to add these life cycle charts. And these charts are designed really with the end user in mind rather than a professional, because we know that professionals are always working with their districts and helping them make decisions on major components, major systems and materials that go in their buildings. And if you look at the lower left of this slide, you'll see that what we've done is we've taken what we believe are probably the most significant in terms of those decisions and tried to provide information for districts to help them understand the variables and be able to carry on a conversation with their designers and making the right decision. So we've done these life cycle comparison checks for the HVAC systems, the flooring. Excuse me. Another one that comes up a lot is primary and secondary electric metering. So that's districts that are contemplating having their own transformers and essentially then being the owners of that. And there's always a pros and cons on doing that, because there's certainly opportunity to save money. But what we've done is we put these in chart forms so that they can look at that. And then we've done that also with exterior envelope, so that, looking at brick versus other materials, as well as asphalt and concrete. And I believe the next slide is a blow up, perhaps. Yeah, so this is the HVAC systems, for example. It's taking our systems that we typically see, comparing them, and a lot of this is based on assumptions. And there's a lot more behind this chart that talks about assumptions in terms of the current cost of energy and those kinds of things. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that we are empowering the end user to be able to have these discussions with their designers. Next slide, please. And then finally, the specification. Go ahead, Melanie.
Before we move off that topic, that was one of the big things our school districts brought up to the listening sessions, that if they knew now, back when they made the decisions, they would have maybe made different decisions. So I think this is a great tool for our superintendents and school district staff to be able to make informed decisions with their architects.
Yes, correct. So finally, the specification sections, which are really mostly there for our designers, because this is where it gets into very detailed information about the various components that are mentioned in Chapter 8. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that, it's still the same kind of format. It's in the CSI format. But what we've done is we've taken a lot of duplication out. We've removed things that are really, in terms of what we're concerned about, not that important. What we're trying to do is reach a level of quality and making sure that that is in there. And then the other things that are really more up to the designer and the installer, we've taken that out. So I think you'll see that it's a lot shorter than it used to be, yet it still has the necessary information to maintain the quality that we're looking for. Next slide. And by the way, just a couple of examples maybe to give of that, because I did have some questions like, well, give me an example of some of the changes. You know, we took out, for example, all of the references to fluorescent lighting. Everything now, obviously the new standard is LED. You know, things like in the piping and plumbing, you know, we now allow PEX for certain diameter. That came away from variances. We tried to look at variances, and the ones that had a lot of repeat that we were always approving, we incorporated that into there. There's things on PVC sanitary piping for certain areas. We now have the passive optical network, which is a PON system, which was being asked a lot, is now in there as an acceptable. And all of that then was coordinated with the other sections of the specifications. I think you'll find that that has been really brought up to date. And then chapter 10 is a bit of a catch-all, but I think the best thing about this is it collects a lot of the forms and the checklists, especially a checklist for our organization as we are going through phase reviews. So that is your designers going through the various phases of design. We're trying to bring consistency in terms of, depending on who checks it, we want everyone to be checking the same thing and make that consistent. So we're doing that. I think that is a work still in progress. We also have links to other agencies and other things as a resource, and also ties into our image galleries. So to be able to provide links for examples of various spaces, as well as case studies. Okay, next, please. Okay, so I mentioned that before on the sustainability, that, you know, daylighting, as far as the chapter is concerned, is looking at studies of how to get good, consistent light in the buildings, not necessarily meeting LEED, although we may be able to meet LEED. But I think the single biggest thing that we did was we took a second look at our minimum standard in terms of the amount of light that we're bringing into classrooms, which currently is at 5% of the area. And so what we've done is we actually asked TDA as our consultant to do some in-depth studies to try to find out where is the optimum amount. Is 5% where we should stay, or is it something that we should do more? And we actually looked at studies from all the way from 5% to 15%. I think you can go to the next slide. I think it shows some examples of, yeah. So we did this with various orientations, various sizes of classrooms. And what we're looking for is we're looking for quality light, and we're trying to find out what is sort of the optimum. We all know that the budgets over the last few years have kept designers from being able to put what they felt from their standpoint as what would be appropriate. And they were always ending up at the 5% because we're trying to get the building in budget and we're getting it down to design manual minimums. So what we ended up doing is we ended up through the end of this study and found out that really 10% is the ratio that seems to be right where we should be in terms of providing the quality light that we need. And so that is a significant change. When I presented this on Friday with a smaller group, you know, there was a lot of architects in the room, and this is a significant thing for them because we are now saying that the baseline is no longer 5%, it's going to be 10%. So that is something no longer can be value engineered out of these buildings. So anyhow, that is That is a significant change to our design manual. Next slide, please. And Melanie, you're up.
Hey, and Bill, as you were mentioning about the glazing, I think we all know how we feel when we have natural light, and then, you know, we go into a conference room and there's no natural light. So we looked at the costs associated with that 10% and believe over the life of the building and the number of students that will impact with that natural light, that it's well worth the first cost. Another item we looked at, we heard about in our listening sessions, we heard that after elementary school, students sometimes are not comfortable using the gang or group restrooms as they were afraid of being bullied or they had privacy concerns. So we also asked TDA to take a look what would be the square foot and cost implications associated with allowing districts the option of grouped individual restroom. Next slide. After evaluating the square footage, it was determined that the grouped individual restrooms were less square feet, but of course, there was a cost associated with that. So we are going to, at the time we are master planning a district, let our district tell us, are they wanting to stay with the group restrooms and maybe have one individual like the top image shows, or do they want to go to a grouped individual restroom? Or are they, doing a high performance learning environment and having individual restrooms within that community? So we will be looking at that during the master planning phase, and an allowance will be provided if our district elects to go to a grouped individual restroom, because we know there's additional costs associated with that. Next slide. Dean, take it away.
Thank you, Melanie. So as you can see, there are a lot of exciting changes and modifications happening to OSDM. If you go to the OFCC website presently, you can see past copies of OSDM. It's archived annually because district agreements are tied to that particular year's criteria. We'll continue to do that in the future, and you can access these past volumes if you want. But it's going to be digital, so that's to be worked out. This isn't the finish line by any means. We're back to the starting line. Annual updates, we have done them. We will continue to do them, except now with the website type approach, they will become more integrated more immediately than just a notice of what has been changed as was in the past. And we're not going to pause on the listening as well. We want to hear when this is available, what your thoughts are, how it has positive effect or possibly negative effect, but we want to hear. It's meant as a communication tool so that everyone can be on the same page and understand what's expected of new buildings and so forth. Popping back up to the top there, what we've talked about today is OSDM, Ohio School Design Manual, the 2,500 page behemoth that is becoming this digital format. Volume 1, as it exists on the website today, is a planning guide. And we are next also going to turn our attention to the planning guide. And what that is, as Melanie had mentioned earlier, it's less than 100 pages, but its focus is going to be more toward districts so they understand what the process is going to be to get in the starting blocks and get the first lap behind them. Who are they going to need? When are they going to need them? What's the process? So again, that is coming in the near future. upon completion of this iteration of OSDM, and will be available on the website as well. The goal for the effective date, I think I mentioned commission meeting in January, so certainly having the new manual online first quarter of 2024. Thank you all very much for joining us. We appreciate your time and your interest, and at this point, we appreciate your questions. Thank you.
Dean, just another thing on the advisory. You know, we really learned a lot when we had those listening sessions. And so we have met twice with a group that participated in the listening session. And we really found it very advantageous to get feedback. We're hoping maybe twice a year to hold an advisory council and just share what we are envisioning for changes and ask for information from our stakeholders for their recommendation on change. So hopefully some of you on this webinar will participate in that. And when you see the manual, please provide feedback. If there's anything you're thinking today that maybe we missed, please share that. And then, of course, as Dean mentioned, please ask any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, Dean, we'll give everyone just a minute in case there are any questions, but as of now, I think you may have covered everything that people were wondering about. So we'll give it just another moment or two, and if there's no questions, then we may be able to give folks some time back. All right, Dean, I am not seeing any questions. So if you would like to go ahead and close us out, that would be
Sure.
perfect.
Okay, very good. Again, a heartfelt thanks to all of you who have joined. This has been recorded. It will be available if you know other colleagues or folks that might like to hear what's happening with the OSDM. Please point them in our direction, and they can hear what you heard today. But again, thank you all.